The invisible sentence. In November 1943, the United States made a decision so cold and calculated that even many American commanders understood its brutality. They realized that storming Bougainville head-on, an island defended by more than 40,000 Japanese troops entrenched in bunkers, tunnels, and jungle strongholds, would bleed the US Marine Corps white. The Japanese had prepared the island for a final, heroic stand, expecting the Americans to oblige them with a frontal assault. But the United States had learned something new about modern warfare. You don't need to kill an entire army if you can make it starve. You don't need to crush an enemy fortress if you can sever the lifeline that keeps it breathing. And that is exactly what America planned to do. The key to this strategy lay not on Bougainville itself, but on a smaller island just to the north, Buka. At first glance, Buka was insignificant, a thin strip of land hidden beneath the vast canopy of the Pacific War. But its airfields were the forward eyes of Rabaul, Japan's most powerful fortress in the South Pacific. Buka launched the Zero fighters that escorted supply convoys, protected troop transports, and kept Bougainville connected to the outside world. As long as Buka remained functional, the Japanese garrison on Bougainville could eat, fight, and survive. But if Buka was blinded, Bougainville would wither. On November 1st, 1943, the Americans activated their plan with ruthless precision. For 7 consecutive days, wave after wave of US aircraft descended upon Buka. It was not a simple bombing raid, nor a symbolic show of strength. It was the deliberate destruction of an artery. P-38 Lightnings raced in at treetop height, shredding Japanese aircraft before they could even climb into the sky. B-25 Mitchells tore apart the runways. Fighters swept the island clean, leaving nothing but burning metal and smoke curling above the jungle. This was the new doctrine of isolation warfare, the heart of America's island-hopping strategy. Generals MacArthur and Nimitz had discovered a flaw in the Japanese plan for a long, attritional war. Japan expected the US to attack every island directly, sacrificing thousands of lives along the way. But the Americans no longer intended to pay that price. Instead, they chose something far colder: bypass the fortress, cut its supply lines, trap the defenders in their own stronghold, and let nature do the killing. It was not heroic. It was not glorious. It was practical, efficient, and devastating. And for the 40,000 Japanese soldiers on Bougainville, it marked the moment their fate was sealed, even though most of them would not realize it for months. As the last plumes of smoke drifted above Buka's shattered runways, another phase of the American plan unfolded. On the very same day that Japan's air cover collapsed, 14,000 US Marines landed on Bougainville. But unlike previous island invasions, this operation did not aim to capture every stronghold or purge every valley of defenders. The Marines seized a carefully chosen beachhead at Cape Torokina, nothing more. Their mission was not to conquer the island, but to build airfields that would allow American aircraft to dominate the region. The rest of the island, with its 40,000 Japanese soldiers, would be left exactly where they were. General Harukichi Hyakutake, the commander of the Japanese 17th Army, watched the American landing with a mixture of confidence and anticipation. He believed the US troops had made a fatal mistake. In his mind, Bougainville would become the stage for a massive, decisive battle. He envisioned a heroic counterattack, one that would push the Americans back into the sea and restore Japanese dominance in the region. He mobilized his troops, prepared his officers, and awaited the enemy assault he was certain would come. But the assault never arrived. What arrived instead was something far more terrifying: a growing emptiness. The skies, once filled with the loud drone of Zero fighters, became eerily silent. American patrols flew overhead unchallenged, circling like vultures. Japanese convoys that attempted to resupply Bougainville were located and destroyed long before they could approach the shore. Destroyers and cruisers prowled the waters. Submarines lurked in the depths. Every ship that tried to slip through the blockade was met with torpedoes, shells, or bombs. In a desperate attempt to keep the garrison alive, Japanese aircraft attempted nighttime airdrops, but US fighters intercepted them, ripping them from the sky. The few supply crates that managed to fall drifted deep into the jungle, never to be retrieved. In May 1944, Japan organized its final large-scale effort to break the blockade, a convoy meant to bring food, ammunition, and medicine. It failed catastrophically. After that, the flow of supplies simply stopped altogether. No more reinforcements. No more rice. No more medical kits. Not even messages. By June 1944, Bougainville had become an island of silence, disconnected from the empire it served, abandoned by the commanders who once promised glory. The Americans, having completed their objective, did not tighten the blockade or attempt to storm the jungle. They simply left the Japanese garrison to collapse on its own. War had transformed into a void, a suffocating emptiness that grew heavier with each passing month. Bougainville was an island that could not sustain even a fraction of the men trapped on it. More than 85% of its surface was dense rainforest, steep mountain ridges, and swampy valleys. There were no large agricultural fields, no stable food sources, no way to feed the tens of thousands of soldiers who now depended solely on the jungle for survival. When the supply lines were cut, Hayakutake issued a grim, almost impossible order: live off the land. But anyone who understood the deadly landscape of Bougainville knew what this command truly meant: starvation. At first, the soldiers tried to hold themselves together with military discipline. They organized foraging teams, rationed what little remained, and searched for edible plants. But the jungle offered no mercy. Many of the roots were poisonous. The fruits were scarce. Every attempt to find food became a gamble between survival and sickness. And as the weeks turned into months, the men learned a horrifying truth: the island could not feed an army. It could hardly feed a village. Hunger stripped the Japanese troops faster than bullets ever could. Rations dwindled to a fraction, then disappeared altogether. Men hunted rats, frogs, and insects. They peeled bark off trees and chewed bitter leaves. Some dug up roots that left them delirious or vomiting for days. With no medicine, even small cuts became gateways to gangrene. Malaria swept through the camps. Dysentery weakened anyone still able to stand. The once proud 17th Army crumbled not under fire, but under the slow, crushing weight of starvation. As months passed, morale decayed into despair. For a time, the soldiers convinced themselves that relief forces would come. They watched the horizon every morning, hoping to see Japanese ships. But no ships came. When their radios finally fell silent and contact with Rabaul was lost, the truth sank in: they had been abandoned. Japan had written them out of the war. They were ghosts long before they died. By early 1945, the garrison was no longer an army. It was a collection of starving survivors clinging to routines that no longer had meaning. Officers tried to maintain formations, but the men were too weak to stand. Patrols staggered only a few kilometers before collapsing. Some soldiers wandered into the jungle and never returned. Then, in August 1945, the unthinkable message crackled across the airwaves: Japan had surrendered. Many troops dismissed the announcement as American propaganda. They refused to believe it. Only when their own general, a frail and defeated Hayakutake, spoke over the failing radio did they accept the truth. The war was over, and their suffering had meant nothing. For 2 years, they had been dying for a campaign that no longer mattered. On September 8, 1945, an event occurred that stunned even hardened US Marines. The jungle began to move. Out of the shadows emerged the survivors of the Japanese 17th Army, not as soldiers, but as hollow, skeletal beings whose appearance defied belief. Roughly 17,000 men remained alive, though alive was barely an accurate word. Some crawled on hands and knees. Others leaned on sticks, branches, or the shoulders of comrades who were scarcely stronger. Their uniforms hung like rags. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken so deep they looked like skulls draped in skin. American Marines, trained to face fierce resistance and hardened by years of island warfare, stood speechless. Many later admitted that the sight reminded them not of defeated soldiers, but of prisoners liberated from a concentration camp. Some Japanese survivors weighed less than 80 pounds. Their bones jutted out through their uniforms. Many were too weak to speak. Those who tried delivered broken sentences in barely audible whispers. As the Americans distributed food, water, and medical aid, they began the grim task of recording the final numbers. The tally was devastating. Of the 40,000 soldiers who had been stationed on Bougainville in late 1943, only about 17,000 remained. The other 23,000 had died, not in a glorious last stand, not under waves of US assaults, but slowly, quietly, invisibly. Records showed that 87% of the dead had not been killed by bullets or bombs. They had been consumed by starvation, disease, exhaustion, and abandonment. The scale of the loss baffled even the American commanders. How could 7 days of bombing, a single week in a war that raged for years, doom an entire army? The answer was as chilling as it was simple. Soldiers don't die only from wounds. They die when their lifeline is cut. Those 7 days in November 1943 didn't kill 40,000 men instantly. They simply severed the artery that kept the garrison alive. Everything that followed, the hunger, the sickness, the despair, was the slow, inevitable consequence of that first week. In the end, Bougainville revealed a truth that few military textbooks ever express. A fortress doesn't fall only when its walls are breached. Sometimes, it becomes a tomb simply because the world stops sending help. The men on Bougainville continued to breathe for nearly 2 years after the airfields of Bucca were destroyed. But their fate, their true moment of death, had been written in that first week of November. Bougainville was not a battle. It was a sentence.